Good evening, continuing with part 3 of this story. My story, Transported. It's a true story but made into a novel diary because it was obviously the diary is historical and it's been turned into fiction, but it's based on facts. It's a beautiful story of what it was to be transported as a convict from England to Australia. It's in 1790 and it's the diary of Elizabeth Harvey to her brother. It's very moving. So I'm going to continue. We're going to continue from Wednesday, her diary entry for Wednesday the 28th of April 1790. The nights are getting cooler. At dusk, the cicadas no longer make such a racket. Thankfully, we have fewer mosquitoes. Instead, the ticks plague us. Yesterday, I had to cut one out of my leg. I'll cut in here. They're very, very painful to remove and they hurt a lot. And you have to get them out. I had one in me in Jamaica and it's one of the worst, nastiest things that could happen to you in the bush. The wound bled and bled. Now both Emily and I wear bandages. Also, my new master tells me to watch out for the leeches that breed by the river. He tells me that he uses these creatures to drain blood from sick people. But he also says that leeches are not good for healthy people and must be burned off with a candle. Last night, Winston was granted an unexpected night's leave. After supper, the four of us sat before the fire. I sat closest, for I needed the light for patching and darning. This family's linen is so neglected. I am grateful to Mamma for having shown me how to sew. Surgeon Russell is kind, if a little absent-minded. I like to pretend that he is my new papa and that I am Winston and Emily's sister. Though Winston shows his wariness towards a convict girl, the surgeon treats me almost like one of his family. But no matter how gentle he is, sooner or later, someone will say something to remind me that I have fewer rights than a chicken or a cow. My master has received a letter from a Lieutenant Maxwell stationed on South Head. He told us that Maxwell writes that those at the lookout are able to grow vegetables and catch a few fish, but the folk left in Sydney Cove are dangerously short of food, and he wonders what will become of them. As he spoke, Winston looked more and more upset. When he could no longer contain himself, he cried, "Too much misery and selfishness. Folk are even mean about lending their cooking pots. I heard of an elderly convict who died while waiting for a kettle to cook his food. When they opened him up, they saw his stomach was empty." "Things will improve very shortly," his father said sharply. "The council appointed by Governor Phillip has ordered the storeship supply to sail to Batavia. How much food can a 170-ton ship carry? She's far too small." "You're right," said his father. But the captain has been told to hire another store ship. However, it is a 6-month voyage. In that time we must pray for a miracle. You're right, said his father, but the captain has been told to hire another store ship. Miracles, Winston cried contemptuously. Miracles only happen in the Bible, and I wonder if they even can be true. My eyes widened in alarm, though I also wonder about the Bible. I would never confess this aloud. Sure as day turns into night, I would be punished. I waited for Winston's papa to give him a scolding. Instead, the surgeon merely smiled and puffed a little harder on his pipe. A little later, Winston asked his papa, "What else?" Lieutenant Maxwell reported. The surgeon emptied his pipe into the hearth. "Why, that he scans the horizon at sunrise and sunset in the hope of glimpsing a sail. He writes that sometimes he has been deceived by low-lying cloud into thinking it might be a vessel." "What will happen if they do not come soon?" My master stretched long legs towards the fire. "Many folk may not survive. It is hard to collect food when we have so little shot and only 2 fishing boats." Winston sprang to his feet to prowl around the hut. "What if the second fleet never arrives? What if the ships are foundered in a storm like the Cyrus? Or they've lost their way?" At this, such a gloom spread over us. I was almost sorry that I'm still alive. Surely it would be easier and quicker to drown at sea than to slowly die of starvation. But Winston's moods are so changeable. Suddenly he'd had enough of all our misery, and he turned to me to cry, "Come now, Lizzie." He threw another stick into the hearth. "You must tell us how you came to be transported." While he waited for my answer, a wind blew up outside. A branch tapped against the other side of the wall. We shivered and drew closer to the hearth. This southern land is so dark and forbidding. Though no one says this aloud, we secretly wonder what monsters and cannibals can be out there. What if they're merely biding their time to attack? Winston repeated his request. I replied that my life story was not so interesting, but the surgeon insisted that I should stop being bashful. So I put down my sewing and began. "Edward, we shared our early years, so I will not bother to write down all I told them. But now they know how Papa had leased his land from Sir George Granger, how Mamma had been dressmaker to his wife, Lady Jane, and how that good lady had sent me to Dr. Nelson to learn my letters. Only when I came to the time our parents were sick from the influenza and then died did my voice falter. Emily was awake and drinking in every word. "Poor you," she cried. "I know what it's like. My mamma went to heaven too." We hugged and consoled each other. The surgeon patted my shoulder when I started to cry. Only Winston seemed unmoved. He wanted to know what had happened to me then. I told him how you, Edward, were only 6 and too young to send away, and how my mamma's younger sister, Flossie, took you in as one of her own. But I was already 9, old enough to start work, because mamma had shown me how to sew. It was decided to apprentice me to a milliner in London. That was when my troubles began. I would have told them more, only my master said that it was very late and that I should finish my story another time. We laid our pallets on the floor and settled onto them, but so many memories kept running through my head. It took me ages to fall asleep. Thursday, 29th of April, 1790. Once more to the river to gather wild spinach. On our way, an animal the size of a roasting pig, with a snouty, pointy snout and spines like a porcupine, waddled across our path. Emily wanted to know its name. I had to confess that I'd never seen one before. When we came to our favourite bend by the river, we found enough spinach to fill my basket. Then we settled onto our log to dangle our feet in the water. I was hoping that the native girl might return. Sure enough, I heard a light crackle behind me, and there she was. This time she approached us more openly. She carried her sleeping baby on her back in a woven basket. Holding out some roasted meat, she showed that it was safe by chewing a piece herself from another grass basket, this one around her waist. She took out another morsel. I found it delicious, something between chicken and fish. I urged Emily to try some, as I thought it could do us no harm. Emily did, and though at first she found the flavour strange, we were so hungry, the meat disappeared very quickly. All this time the girl was smiling and watching our every move. Though her skin was covered in oil and smelt like stale fish, I had never seen anyone with such splendid dark eyes or even white teeth. When all the meat had gone, she searched in her basket and handed us 2 small cakes. They tasted something like bread, but very coarse, because some of my teeth are broken and decayed. I had to chew very carefully. Finally, she offered us 2 sticks covered in honey and showed us how to suck on them. They were delicious, the best thing we've eaten in a very long time. Now the baby gave a little cry. She removed him from his basket, and he blinked and smiled as if he knew we wanted to play. Emily held out her arms. His mother handed him over, and I helped Emily hold him while we tickled his hands and toes and made him laugh. Certainly he was the happiest baby I've ever seen since leaving Cranham. Suddenly, an older man, also an Indian Aborigine, stepped out of the bushes. He carried several spears and what I think must be other weapons. His beard and hair were thick with dust and grime, his skin covered in oil, and he also smelt foul. I handed the baby back to his mother and flung my arms around Emily. What if this man ate children? I knew that Indians or Aborigines had speared several convicts. Some had even died from their wounds. But the savage took as little notice of us as had the porcupine pig. Instead, he spoke sternly to the girl. She hung her head. It was clear that he was chastising her for being with us. I felt very sorry for her. They all disappeared into the bush as silently as they had come. Then my heart nearly jumped into my mouth. A man! This one white and hiding in the bushes behind us. How long had he been there? Then I realized that it was only Simple Sam. The poor man is so lonely he must be looking for friends. If I had been alone, I might have paused to chat with him a while. Instead, I yelled, "Off with you, Sam!" and he crashed through some bushes and disappeared. After all this excitement, Emily was very tired, though she protested that she wanted to walk. I piggybacked her home and made her rest on her pallet until sunset. Friday, 30th of April, 1790. Spent all day catching up on household tasks and teaching Emily to write her first words. Emily, she wrote in the dust, then cat and dog. I told her how pleased I was with her and added that she will read and write as well as her papa. But even this small activity tires her, though I force her to eat wild spinach in the hope that this will bring more colour into her cheeks. Too often her breathing turns shallow and raspy. Purple shadows circle her eyes, and her cheeks seem pale as death. Winston did not appear for supper. My master tells me that he must spend most nights in the barracks. The militia oversees those convicts working in the fields to ensure none run away to China. But there is a twinkle in my master's eye as he tells me this. Perchance he is not serious. Where exactly is China? I'm sure that we would not have been quite as hungry if our fleet had landed there instead of Botany Bay. My master has instructed me to make soup out of wild spinach, salted pork, bones and rice. He said it would probably not hurt to throw in some hard tack. Our aching teeth will enjoy the softness. I did as he suggested. After we settled at the table, he prayed, "For what we are about to receive, may the Lord make us truly thankful. Amen." We ate the soup very quickly and loudly wished that there was more. Sunday, 2nd of May, 1790. Emily's lessons go well. She can now read many words, starting with the letter B, bar, bird, bone, bell, bolt. As a reward, and this being Sunday, I took her to visit Sarah. Sarah was pleased to see us, though very busy. She has another girl to help her look after Master Dodd. The girl's name is Jane, and I thought her a plain Jane, indeed, as she could barely smile us a greeting. Sarah says that she performs well enough. It seems that Jane has not enough sense to question directions, but that she has enough to follow them. "What do you hear from Sydney Cove?" I asked as soon as we arrived, because Master Dodd was and still is close to Governor Phillip. They get the latest news very quickly. Sarah has only contempt for the militia. However, in her eyes, Governor Phillip can do little wrong. She likes to remind me that it is a rare governor who insists that everyone, both freeman and convict, share equal rations when there is not enough food to go around. Little to report, though Lieutenant Ross is no longer with us, she replied. The Master reports that Governor Phillips says that he was a most disagreeable deputy, always whining and bad-tempered, so it's a good thing that he's gone to Norfolk Island, where he can do less harm than here. Only I pity those poor souls that have gone with him. Outside the window, two greyish-brown birds with large beaks were setting up such a cackle she had to wait for them to stop. And one more thing, she added. The governor thinks he must cut our rations further. Surely not, I cried. How will we survive? Not even Sarah handing me 4 pullet eggs, one for each of us, could make me smile. I was very careful to thank her. I'm not sure if Sarah should be giving them to us. If she is found out, she may be severely punished. At Rose Hill, we are not restricted to such harsh rationing as those in Sydney Cove, but there is still hardly enough to fill our bellies. Again, I have been dreaming about the rich milk and cream our mamma's cow Daisy used to produce. Also, I like to imagine that I'm eating slices of oven-fresh bread, smothered in butter and gooseberry jam, rich meat pies with lashings of mashed potato and gravy, new season peas, beans and apples, wild strawberries and berries plucked from the hedgerows. My poor belly, how it cries out for more food. Tuesday, 4th of May, 1790. This morning, Emily asked me why I would not play with her. I was sweeping the hut with my brushwood broom. As you see, I said impatiently, I have too much else to do. Cannot the animals do this for you? I paused in my sweeping. Maybe they could. Back home, some housewives would clean a chimney by throwing a fowl into it. Her eyes grew large. Did not a fowl protest? I giggled. Surely it did. It would stalk out of the house most indignantly, even though it was covered in soot. But Emily is right. I am much too busy, though not half as busy as if I was home. This is because I have no dough to set, no milk to churn, no poultry to chase away from under chairs and tables, no fruit and vegetables to preserve. Instead, I use a branch to swat insects away and wonder where our next meal will be coming from. Wednesday, 5th of May, 1790. Last night, Winston turned up saying he had 2 days' leave and would spend them with his family. We sat around the fire, the surgeon smoking his pipe, Emily resting on her pallet. Soon as the sun fell into the horizon, Winston asked for more of my story. Indeed, Lizzie, you must, said my master. It does my children much good to hear how others manage their misfortunes. Winston is so prickly. He took immediate offence. Papa, you think I do not know? My master merely smiled and shook his head. He took a stick from the fire to light his pipe and puffed on it. One of his stockings, the toe, is vanished completely, must be patched. First I settled myself to my sewing. Then I began telling them how I had left all Mamma and Papa's possessions with Aunt Flossie, who was to be your new Mamma. Edward, should this journal reach you, please make sure that our aunt returns Mamma's 4 chairs, 2 beds and our table. Also many of the kitchen pots, pans, mugs and plates belong to us, as does our plough horse's almost new bridle. Do not forget to take the 2 milking buckets, Papa's spades, hatchet, wheelbarrows, cart and grindstone, and Mamma's spinning wheel. Edward, I do not know what happened to our parents' house, nor the land that Papa ploughed. Before I left for London, I made our uncle promise not to let anyone else move in. But 4 years later, perhaps he has forgotten. Like our Papa and his Papa before him, you are now the farm's tenant, and the land is yours to work. I told the Russells how I had journeyed to London with my few clothes, 6 shillings in my pocket, and a small packet of bread and meat. It took the chaise nearly a week to arrive. Then the streets seemed filled with so many drunken folk and beggars. I was fearful to dismount, and very sorry I had ever left home. My new mistress had sent a man to bring me to her house. He led me through a warren of lanes and alleyways, all made dark and filthy with soot and animal droppings. There was so much noise from carriages rolling past and street peddlers. I was sure that if I stayed, I would very shortly become deaf. Winston's cough was disbelieving. Truly that bad? Truly that bad, I said indignantly. How can Winston question me when I know that he's never been to London? Even at night the streets wear a pall of smoke from too many coal fires. Only the main streets are lit by oil lamps. The streets have so much refuse, so many open sewers, a person could die from the stench. I had to hold my nose so I could manage to arrive at my new mistress's house without vomiting. I paused for breath. In the silence, I noticed that the wind had dropped. I said, "Did I tell you that I was apprenticed to a milliner?" Winston cleared his throat. "That you did." I glanced around the room. Emily had fallen asleep. How much of my story had she heard? Excuse me a moment. The surgeon puffed his pipe and sat behind a fug of smoke. The fire cast strange shadows. Outside the window, the southern sky was ablaze with stars. Mistress Mary Clark, I went on, hated to spend a penny if ever a farthing would do. She used her apprentices as domestics as well as seamstresses. I slept on a narrow mattress in the attic. This bed I shared with Nancy Park, the other apprentice. 2 girls in one bed? Said my master. From what I saw in London, I was lucky to have even that, I replied. He puffed on his pipe and motioned for me to continue. We rose at dawn, worked hard all day, and did not see our bed until late at night. For this we were given a little bread and sometimes a mutton chop. What must you do in exchange? Winston asked. I glanced up from my sewing. His gaze was fixed on the fire. Right now, Mistress Clark's house felt like a very bad dream from which I had thankfully woken. I explained how I had to empty the slops into the street and the fireplaces of ashes. I fetched water, laundered clothes, dusted, swept, and helped prepare my mistress's dinner. Between those tasks, I learned how to cut, shape, sew, and iron various fabrics. Then I would carry the finished bonnet to whoever had ordered it. This way I saw much of the city. Winston said, "Well, what did you think of London town?" I paused to think. A bigger place of contrasts would be hard to find. Gentlefolk wear coats and dresses made of fine silk and satins. Their powdered wigs are so high they make the wearer seem twice as tall. Once they are clad in their best, they walk London's great streets and squares and meet in the pleasure gardens of Ranelagh and Vauxhall. "So much for the rich," he said. "And the poor? Why, they live in a wilderness where there's always the threat of death from gangs of ruffians and general lawlessness. The poor only stop themselves from cutting their own throats by drinking too much gin. Surely the runners keep this in check." I shook my head. "The runners are only permitted to carry lanterns and wooden batons. They are poorly paid. To survive, they must take bribes. Thieving is so common, it is whispered that the king himself was robbed while walking in his gardens in Kensington." "That has long been coffee-house gossip," the surgeon butted in, "and hardly worth repeating." A log slipped out of the fire. He carefully replaced it. Then he said, "Tell us more about your work." I looked up from my stitching and said, "I was quick to learn, and my mistress was pleased with me. As time went on, she found more and more for me to do." Winston said, "Why did not the other apprentices take her share?" I picked up another stocking and leaned towards the fire for more light to thread my needle. Her sewing was not as skilful, and she was lazy. From certain looks she sent me, I soon learned that it was not beyond her to hate her fellow servants, and it did not take long before her hatred took solid form. At this, my master roused himself with a start. He patted my shoulder somewhat awkwardly, then decided that it must be bedtime. "Lizzie, you will tell us more tomorrow." Winston helped me lay the pallets on the floor, and we settled down to sleep. Soon my master's snores rang through the hut, but I was so tired, nothing short of a tempest at sea would have kept me awake. Thursday, 6th of May, 1790. This morning I laundered Emily's linen in lye and hot water. Her clothes are so worn, I fear that with another washing they will shred too far to patch. While I worked, I let my hand wander over all that had happened to me. Relating my story brings up so many memories. Many are so horrid, I wish I could forget them. But when Emily asked me what my parents looked like, I found that I could hardly remember. Lately, Mamma's face has become confused with Sarah's, and Papa begins to look like Henry Dodd, and sometimes like Surgeon Russell. Edward, how different if we had been rich. Wealthy folk hire artists to paint them, so they cannot forget what their loved ones look like. I remember our mamma telling me that when Lady Granger was young, she was so beautiful, artists clamoured to paint her portrait. The surgeon wears a locket on his heart. Inside the locket is a miniature of Mary Russell, his dead wife. And when he showed it to me, I examined her very carefully. Her hair was yellow, and she had blue eyes, pink cheeks, and a mole on her left cheek. Her children look like her, in that both are fair-skinned and delicately built. My eyes are sore, and I'm very tired. Enough writing for tonight. Sunday, 9th of May, 1790. This morning, Master Henry Dodd called everyone to join him under a stand of red gums. He began the service with the Lord's Prayer and then Rock of Ages. The militia's drummer and fife accompanied our singing, but many felt too low to join in. Halfway through Rock of Ages, the skies opened up. Soon our clothes were drenched, leaves and twigs squelched under our feet, streams trickled into puddles. Master Dodd ignored the rain and stood on a log to deliver his sermon. He's a plain man with a round face, pock-marked skin hidden under coarse brown hair, and a 3-day beard. His blunt speech and manner remind me of our papas. He urged us to keep up our spirits, saying that if we neglected to pray, all would be lost. He promised us that any day more ships would sail from Cape Town into Sydney Cove. These ships will carry enough provisions to last us until more crops could be reaped. "What if the ships don't come?" someone called from the crowd. "What if Noah had not prayed?" he answered right back. "Remember how Noah and his family stayed on their ark 40 days and 40 nights. Why, if Noah had lost faith, none of us would be here." Not everyone could accept this. Someone called, "Perchance Noah had enough to fill his belly, and faith to him were easier." Another cried, "Noah had all those animals to eat if he were hungry." Yes, we're starving too much to pray." If they thought this could silence Master Dodd, they were sorely mistaken. He reminded us of how brave we had been at sea, how in the coldest and stormiest leg of our journey we had helped each other survive. He finished off by describing all our achievements this last year in Rose Hill, telling us how we were so much better off than anyone in Port Jackson. This year there has been little rain, and by the time his sermon was over, the sky was a rich, deep blue. A flock of scarlet, green, and yellow rose hillers flew overhead. Someone shouted that this was a good omen, and we set off for our huts, far more cheerfully than we had left them. After our sparse dinners, my master said that he would stay with Emily, and he gave me a few hours to spend however I might desire. I went to visit Sarah. Over a cup of licorice tea, she told me that there is talk in Sydney Cove that everyone, and this includes the militia, and even their officers, must take turns catching fish. Picturing some of those proud men casting lines and then having to scale and gut those smelly creatures made us laugh most heartily. "Not that Winston will mind too much," I said. "I think he enjoys fishing." She said, "Have you two become friends? Winston is never rude, but he always lets me know that he is militia and that I am a convict. Besides," I frowned uncertainly. "Perchance I imagine it, but whenever he addresses me, his stammer grows worse." She smiled knowingly. "That young man must learn how often it's only luck that separates rich from poor." I hugged her. Maybe Sarah cannot read and write or say her words properly, but she is truly a wise woman. She hugged me back, crying, "I really miss you, Lizzie. Jane does her job well enough, but she ain't no fun to be with." "I miss you too, Sarah," I cried, and we held each other a very long time. When I got back to the Russells, Emily was lying on her pallet, sobbing as if her little heart would break. "Where were you, Lizzie?" she cried. "I thought you were gone forever." I placed her on my lap, saying, "I was only visiting Sarah. You and me are great friends, and you know that I will never part from you." "But my mamma said that," she sobbed, "and then she went to heaven." She buried her head in my chest. She was so hot and feverish, it took me an hour to calm her down. Fortunately, Sarah had found enough flour to bake Emily a heart-shaped biscuit. I showed it to her, and she brightened up very quickly. Monday, 10th of May, 1790. 10th of May, happy birthday to my Layla. It's 1967. A morning of misfortune. Excuse me a moment. I have a bit of a cold. Not much, but it's the weather. It's horrible weather. A morning of misfortune. Emily is still feverish and refuses to eat. Her father tells me that I must force her to drink as much water as possible, but even water makes her throw up. I have seen this illness before. It comes from our salt meat, which is so rotten. My master thinks that we would be healthier, only eating dried peas, oats and rice, and whatever vegetables that can be passed our way. To add to my distress, while laundering, I dropped a full cauldron of boiling water. I narrowly missed scalding my feet. Then I had to fetch more water and find more wood to fill the wood box. To add to my annoyance, our last slither of soap slid into the cauldron and melted away completely. To make more soap, I needed potash and animal fat. Of course, I have none. I worry that if the surgeon hears about these misadventures, he might want another servant, someone stronger and less clumsy. By late afternoon, I had brought all the washing inside. It looked clean enough, though with more rips for me to mend. Eventually, Emily was no longer as feverish, and I had her drinking a little water and nibbling on a biscuit. Peas porridge and rice for supper. The surgeon did not arrive until well after sunset. He looked so weary, with barely enough energy to light his pipe, that I felt very sorry for him. He tells me that shortly we must all move back to Sydney Cove, for he is needed there to help the sick. I pray that this will not happen too soon. "Of course, Lizzie, you will come with us," he said. "But as that means I must leave Sarah behind, I'm in two minds over this, even though I would dearly like to see what is happening in Sydney Cove." Tuesday, 11th of May, 1790. This morning, Emily had a little more colour in her cheeks. I'm sure that it is the wild herbs I force her to eat, though she always groans and complains that they're far too bitter. She finished her lessons and demanded a reward. I clapped my hands and sang her a rhyme. Mamma sang to you, Edward. Intery, mintery, cuttery corn, brambly briar and brambly thorn, wire, briar, barrel, lock, 3 geese in a flock, 1 flew east and 1 flew west and 1 flew over the cuckoo's nest. When we got to the end, I tickled Emily's ribs like Mamma did ours. Emily laughed so much. I sang and sang until I could not manage another croak. Edward, I think that in some ways Emily has replaced you in my mind. Not that I love you any less, you're still my closest living relative, but you're so far away. Who knows if we shall ever see each other again? All I can hope is that this journal will sooner or later arrive in Cranham, and then you will know that I have never forgotten you. Winston arrived shortly before supper, carrying 4 pink and grey cockatoos. We are hungry enough to eat anything that walks, crawls or flies. But it pained me to see those pretty birds so dead and bedraggled. Winston started to tell me how he had trapped them and wrung their necks. I shuddered and told him that I'd rather not know. It won't stop you eating them, will it? He snapped at me impatiently. We would have quarrelled then and there, only he picked up the birds and stalked off. When he returned, I saw that he had cut off their heads and gutted them. I dipped the carcasses in boiling water, plucked their feathers and skewered them on sticks. Now I could pretend that they were only chickens, but I was still very cross. I told myself that Winston might think he's all grown because he's a member of the Royal Marines, but he's just a teasing boy. If I once thought we might be friends, then I was sorely mistaken. When his papa arrived home, we cooked the birds over the fire and ate them with a little peas pudding. The taste reminded us of wild fowl, though it was a little more gamey. Supper over, Emily reminded her papa that she wished to hear more of my story. The surgeon lit his pipe and drew on it. We have quite a Scheherazade in Lizzie, he told his children. Perchance there are things she might not want to relate. Not true, sir, I cried hotly. God knows I have nothing to hide. Except for a bad temper, Winston murmured. I was about to answer that I'm only bad-tempered when sorely provoked. Just in time, I bit my tongue. Edward, our mamma always said that I let it run away with me. I must remind myself that I am only a servant, a girl and a convict. They can dismiss me whenever they please, but it's hard to stay silent when others are being stupid or insensitive. Thankfully, Emily cried, Who is Scheherazade? The surgeon reached out to stroke his daughter's arm. Why, she was a beautiful lady who must tell 1,001 stories so as not to lose her head. Emily giggled and slid her thumb into her mouth. She does not always take her papa and brother as seriously as I must. The surgeon turned to me. On with your story, Scheherazade, he said mock sternly. or we will be too sleepy to listen." I had almost forgotten where I'd left off, but Winston quickly reminded me. I took my sewing closer to the fire. Then I started on how Nance, the other apprentice, had been 15 and grown, and how I could not help noticing that she and Silas, who was our manservant, spent much time whispering in corners when they thought no one saw them. My mistress had already told us how several small things had gone missing: a gold ribbon, 2 bobbins of thread, and a small pair of scissors. When she discovered that a single silken gown and matching bonnet, these were made for a fine lady, were also missing, she set up such a cry, one might have thought everything she owned had been stolen. She brought Silas, Nance, and myself into her workroom to question us. We insisted that we knew nothing about it. My mistress fixed us with a glare that could kill a grown man. "Goods worth over 7 shillings, she cried. "If any of you have taken them, why, I will have you in jail before you can count to 10. She combed through the attic where Nance and I slept. I had tied the 6 shillings I had brought with me into a kerchief and hidden this in my wooden box. I had hoped that while I was in London I might earn a guinea or 2. Then my plan was to return to Cranham and use the money to keep Edward and myself in modest comfort. Immediately my mistress found this money. She decided that it was hers and that I had stolen it. No matter how much I protested my innocence, she called the runners and they marched me off to jail." Here Winston cut in. "Did you not say the money was yours?" Tears rolled down my cheeks. I did, but I was 9 years old and an apprentice. Who would believe me? Did you know who had really stolen those clothes? I am sure that Silas and Nance plotted it together. They must have stolen those other things too. Shortly after, I went to prison. They left my mistress's house to open a tavern. Where else could they have found the money to do that? What I did not say was how, in the beginning, I could hardly believe that this was really happening, that it was not all a terrible dream from which I would shortly wake. I found myself behind bolted doors. The turnkeys punished me most severely for having no money. But I had lost everything that was most precious to me, and I had done nothing wrong. Nothing. "Tell my children more about the jail," said the surgeon. These are places to inspire dread, even in the most hardened criminal. I shuddered, and I went on to say that whatever they had heard about those places cannot equal their true horror. I was thrown into a cell with the most evil criminals. My few things were quickly stolen, and I think I was lucky not to be strangled or stabbed. The law stated that I must be tried by a judge before 3 days were up. It was December and the middle of winter. Those on trial had to wait their turn in an open courtyard. This yard was so cold the puddles froze under our feet. An icy wind cut through the few rags we wore. When they brought me into Justice Hall, the first thing I saw was how both judge and jury carried nosegays of fresh herbs. These were to protect them from the stench coming from us prisoners. Here my master broke in to explain how the herbs were also used as a protection against prison fever or typhus, a most deadly disease. He turned to me to say, "You were fortunate not to catch it." Winston yawned, as if weary, but I knew he wanted to hear more, because he stammered, "Was anyone allowed into the court to watch your case?" I laughed wryly. Why, it was better than a Punch and Judy show. The court was filled with people who made fun of everything. They called out, making judgments that had nothing to do with the guilt or innocence of the accused. What did the judge want to know? My name, and how old I was, and my occupation, and then if I was guilty of this crime. I answered him as truthfully as I knew how. Then he called my mistress onto the stand. She gave them such a pack of lies. She said that I'd always been lazy, that I could never be trusted. Of course the judge only listened to her. My fate was sealed. In less than 15 minutes. Did you not protest? I did, but it did me no good whatsoever. My master openly shuddered. The fire was burning low. He heaped more wood onto it, then turned to say, "Tomorrow I have much to do, Lizzie. You must continue your story another time." I rose from my stool, and he helped me arrange our pallets on the floor. The nights are growing cold. I wished I had a warm quilt to lay over Emily. Her papa guessed my thoughts and covered her with his coat. She stirred, but did not wake. She needs a lot of sleep. I notice that the surgeon's coat is torn in 3 places, but I have no dark thread with which to fix it. Perchance Sarah will have some. There is just enough firelight to finish this off. I'm going to stop there because there's still quite a few pages more to read, and it's better to do it this way than, as I said before, they're all about equal where I stop. So we'll stop here and then do section 4 next time. So Deborah, I hope in Australia, when you get to hear this tomorrow or the day after or whenever you realise I'm back online, I hope you'll enjoy it. I dedicate it to you and your family and your original family, who we don't know what circumstances they went to Australia, do we? Let's hope they were the not guilty of anything either. Okay, God bless you, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I. This is my second reading. I read it to myself, and I just thought you'd love it. Being Australian now, born there, raised there.